My name is Hanne. I'm head of design at Eggs in Stavanger. And I work as a consultant and do a lot of project sales, try to get the right cool projects for my designers. And with me today is Adeline.
Hi, my name is Adeline. I'm associate professor at Christiania in Oslo. I'm head of a bachelor program called Design, Strategy and Society, or it's in the transition from it used to be called the Bachelor in Service Design. I'm also head of the Center for Design Studies at Christiania. I have, as my background, I have a bachelor degree in design, product design in textiles. I was not confident enough in my design skills to even pick the sticker that said designer to put on my on my notes, because pretty much right after I finished design school, I figured out I was much more interested in how design impacts society, the role of design and innovation. So I have a Master of Science and a PhD from BI Norwegian Business School on innovation studies. That's me.
Me and Adeline, we met in, I think it was January last year. And we started discussing this thing. What is design and what is design really? And we just kept on discussing. So this is an experiment. We want to check out how this format is with all you guys here. So we think that's a lot of fun. But we also want to take it a bit kind of down, because as a designer, I feel I have to always have the answers to things. At least that's what I'm trying to tell my clients that I have. But meeting Adeline, who's actually researching these things, have made me believe that, okay, I don't need to know the answers all the time. But we also want to include you guys. And how are we going to do that, Adeline?
Well, so we decided that, well, every time Hanne and I meet, we have very interesting discussions. So me from more a theoretical research perspective and Hanne from a practitioner perspective. But we never had this kind of conversation before. So when we met, it was January. It was really cold. There was a fireplace in the room. We were at the PhD course. We were discussing design thinking, innovation, leadership with PhD students. And now we wanted to try if we can take that format into a new arena. Well, it's quite difficult with so many people. So we've tried to see if we can find a way to incorporate you guys into our conversation. So it might be a bit cliche, but we have tried to. Here we are. That's us at the PhD course. Just met. So if you have any questions, you want to add some comments, because we never have any answers. We always have more questions every time we're done talking. So I'm sure maybe that will rub off on you guys. If you have comments, maybe you have more experience or even more knowledge about some of the stuff that we're talking about. And that would help us in our quest to understand things and understand design and the role of design. So feel free to chime in. I will try to monitor the board while we're talking. So that's our Menti code. I saw a lot of you taking pictures. So just to see if it works, and because we're actually really curious about this. So since you're here, I guess you're interested in design. So what do you associate with the word design? What's design for you? Let's see if we can make a nice little cloud. This really reminds me of when I was teaching during the pandemic, actually. But it's nice. Colors and shapes.
Creating, I like that.
I like curiosity.
Yeah, that's what you ended up picking, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. For the notes on your tag.
Yeah. And dreamer. Cliché.
Veien til målet, the journey towards, I don't know, the goal somewhere. I don't know how to translate it, but I like it. Problem solving, of course. Cool. Branding. Happiness.
Beauty. Aesthetics. Yeah. Oh, there's a big one for problem solving. I'm not sure that would be as big 20 years ago.
No, that might be right.
So it's one of the reasons why it's so interesting to actually talk about what design is. So as you can see from this, you'll see that there are so many different understandings of the word design. And we've specifically just used the word design for this talk. Design could be anything. We could have said UX design or service design or interaction design, but we want to understand more broadly what is design in our society today or in our organizations. Anything that strikes you from the word cloud?
I'm just still looking at problem solving.
It's so big. And colors, usability.
Yeah.
User experience. Yeah. So design has a lot of different parts. We're not going to be able to cover all these parts, so we're going to try to stay on top. The meta level, at least for me, since I'm more theoretical, you're going to go into some actual cases.
Yeah, let's hope so. But first, I kind of want to start with where does design come from? And my training and background is an industrial designer. So when I kind of look back into history, you have everything before the Industrial Revolutions, it's more about crafts. Then you had a craftsman making something, and even though you had a lot of craftsmen joining together and creating and producing the same patterns and looks and styles and on cups and wallpapers, it's still not industrial design or mass-produced goods. That came with the Industrial Revolutions. Then we got glasses, cups, chairs that looked the same and were produced in the same fabric and exported to a larger region and area. And the next thing I want to kind of mention is what happened after the Second World War. We wanted to rebuild Europe, and you wanted to rebuild the industry. So what they made was a new business model. And the business model was so that designers could draw a design and then hand it over to a manufacturer who would produce and sell the goods. And the designer would then get a royalty. And that's the start of kind of the studio culture, as we as designers know it today, when you produce stuff and you get a royalty from what you already had made. We step up to maybe the 1980s. We all heard about the, I was a kid then, so I don't know how it was, but we heard about the boom in advertising and how cool it was to be the creative people who made the cool stuff. And I kind of imagine kind of broad shoulders and a big hair. And advertising and creativity and being the creative person was amazing. And then we move on to maybe 2020. We have Steve Jobs, no longer wide shoulder, but a high turtleneck, and a lot of black clothes. And products are becoming very similar looking. They're supposed to be efficient and work well and streamlined. And it's all this form follows function that you see everywhere. But that's actually something that's from the 1960s, so it's really old. And today, I think, of course, it's cool to make products, but a lot of us designers are working with ideas and thoughts, and how do we kind of apply design and design thinking to other areas? Managers are asking us, academics, professionals in other areas. So it kind of all comes down to this, what is design now? Yeah.
Yeah, so design has maybe now more understood as problem solving or ways to understand complexity and different methods to apply to understand complexity. And that's been quite a journey from only designing mainly physical products to designing experiences and systems and interactions and behavioral patterns in people. But it also kind of made some confusion for the field of design itself. So when is it design enough and when is it problem solving and who gets to design? And I introduced you guys in the beginning to my bachelor program that I'm head of at Christiania, which is changing its name from service design to design strategy and society, because we're feeling maybe somehow the idea of service design is becoming too narrow, and maybe it has served its function. We don't know. We're taking a risk and rolling the dice, but that's why it's so interesting to talk about design. So Hanne told you about the studio cultures, where before design students and design practitioners would work in studios where peer critique is really important. And then you would get critique, you would present your work, you'll have a teacher or studio manager or somebody who will help you. And then the idea is that your own design discipline will improve on the way by you being in this fellowship. But now that design is kind of moving into new areas, so design thinking for management, service design, which is supposed to be able to design anything or even the invisible services. There's this huge hype about design thinking, and I was kind of harsh in the PhD course because I come from design research, and a lot of people say that design thinking has been dead for 15 years, so let's not even talk about it, right? But it has had a really important purpose And I also think that if you're going to contrast the designerly thinking of professional designers with the design thinking of managers and other we can call non-designers, there's also an important thing that happens there when those who learn design thinking from outside design will better understand the actual designers.
And when you kind of told me that, well, design thinking is dead, I went into this inner dialogue of kind of like, well, that's what I'm selling. That's what I'm living on. And still today I'm selling design thinking and claiming that design thinking can solve anything. And it's a really odd contrast because you have all these labels and names on things. And I have a client asking, well, I need a service designer, a really skilled service designer. And I send them my best service designers. And after a week, it comes back and say, well, they don't need service design. They don't want to change any services, but they need a really good front end. And that's kind of harsh. So we switch labels depending on whose client, what is the client, what client is asking. Oh, in this project you're a UX designer, but no, it's Stavanger Kommune asking. Sorry, you're a service designer today. It's comic, but still, what I think designers always bring to the table is this value of being able to be a creative person. That you know how to associate, that you know how to build ideas on top of each other, and bringing that into the mix, I think work marvels in a lot of projects.
Yeah, and I don't want to like kick the legs under my students who's been doing service design. I think that maybe we just need to open up the idea of design a little bit and not necessarily always use these labels in a way. So that's also the reason we've been discussing this back and forth for a long time. Like what is design? When is it no longer design? When has it moved too far into some direction? And we were thinking, like, how do we actually see this practice of design? And I was thinking, what are we teaching the students? And Hanne was telling how she works and what her values are as a designer out in organization. And we were thinking, okay, so design has drawn a lot of pragmatism before. It's a very actionable discipline, or now a number of disciplines. So we decided, okay, what if we try to frame design as a type of learning? So we thought it was much nicer to have a flip over. I'm not sure the last time you saw a flip over. So I think the magic of Hanne and I is that she comes with all her practical experience and I come with these theoretical concepts. So we kind of try to discuss, what if design is about experiential learning? So here's Kolb and Kolb's cycle. It's based on Dewey and pragmatism. And the idea is that you have some concrete experience that you have been through before. You make some reflection, some active reflection. This is where learning starts to happen, that you actually reflect on your actions. So if you only act without reflection, you're just acting. You're not really learning, at least not in this type of way of seeing it. And then you form some abstract understanding or conceptualizations. And in design, we often call them assumptions or hypotheses about how the world is. But then you have to actually test those hypotheses to be able to see if they are correct. And this is made for learning in general, for education, but it could also be for organizations and individuals on all levels. But design is especially equipped to do active experimentation to provide new concrete experience.
And it kind of makes sense if you look at kind of how we do insights and how we always start a project. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. I'm going to move over here. How we always start with kind of get the experience. We go out there and we try to feel the same as our users. We try to, if you're working with hospital services, you try to act the patient for a day. So we try to get the experience. And then we go down to our offices and we start to drawing down and discuss, this is what happened, why did this happen, and then try to put it together. So we reflect. And then we try to make this kind of abstract and try to pull out insights from the project and so on. And then, at least a lot of times, I'm not even able to get to that phase because I only keep on going on this side. And I always try to sell in that we're going to do a lot of fun experiments. But for some reason, we get stuck in this, at least in this loop of trying to figure things out. And when you want to do an experiment, oh no, but it's a bit scary and you're a bit afraid. And no, we need to learn a bit more before we go further on. At least that's what I feel.
Yeah, and from design research, we find that service designers or system designers or any kind of designer often has a problem with the idea of implementation to get to the implementation part of a project. And research from the School of Architecture and Design, Frida Almqvist, she's shown that you go through this kind of learning, you go through a design process where you have some experiences, you do some reflections, you make some hypotheses, and maybe you get to do some experimentation. But who is learning in this process? So another researcher an educator at AHO, Birgir Sevaldsson, shows how designers use visually abductive reasoning. So they use and think through making drawings and diagrams and prototypes. But what happens in Frida Almqvist's research is that when the designer leaves the project, and that could be for practical reasons, economic reasons, the designer takes a lot of the learning with them out of the project. So what we've been thinking about is how could we improve design as learning? So how can we kind of go full loop? And more importantly, how can we learn together so that when the designer leaves, the designer does not necessarily take all the information with them?
And I have a friend, and he's putting together a startup, and he's done it before, so he has some money with them. And he picked up his phone and sent emails to every single design agency in Norway and asked, I want to make this, can you help me? And from every agency, except one, and that was not mine, he got the answer, we need to do a process. And he wanted to make a thing. And then we answered him, well, I need you guys to make a process. So then we're kind of curious what that actually means, that we're actually doing so much research and getting so stuck in our own processes that we're stopped delivering value. And that in some odd way leads me on to kind of the concept of co-creation. And how many of you have been working with co-creation? One hand, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, cool. Keep on doing that. Because the problem with designers taking things away from the project all the time is that you have to kind of know everything in the project to start create things, and then when you go away, the knowledge is suddenly lost. So some ways to kind of improve that is to do things together. Bring the developers on early in the discovery phase, bring your client along, and then you have something called co-creation, which specifically the municipalities has been excellent in trying to try out and use. And they kind of made this chart that says that, okay, you have the municipalities and organizations in one side, and then you have the citizens or user on the other side. And then you also have this axis of kind of having a predictable outcome of the co-creation process and an uncertain outcome. And then I kind of put labels in there. On the bottom, you kind of have, you know what you're going to get. And if the organization is putting very strict, a lot of kind of user involvements and user tests are just this. You're involved people in your process, but you're not giving them anything except a tiny thing to say or something. You can also move over to empowerment, and this would be that you kind of give people something to build, and then you see what they do, but you give them a very limited thing. But what I really think is cool to work with is to kind of work with co-creation. Either that we invite people in a workshop, and they get to do a lot of things and give a lot of input. But the coolest thing I know about is co-production, and I've been testing for the last years if it's possible to do in large engineering teams. Turns out it is, but that's really scary because then I have to show how bad an engineer I am. So we built this huge prototype for oceaneering, and we asked them to assemble it. We didn't send any drawings, any instruction, just a picture of how it's going to look, and there was a lot of metal pieces. They picked it up, put it together, and cut that piece in two because they thought that would be better. But it was so awesome to see that they were touching the things, they were manipulating them, they were deciding that no, this is not good enough, we need to do it better. But of course I felt the critique, I should have done it better. But if you're really able to do co-creations together with your clients, they get to input and put their thoughts directly into the product and not having you to be the translator all the time. So I think that's super interesting, and I kind of could talk forever about that. But I also wanted to give you kind of a small tip to go on the way, and I talked about designers being creative. Workshop rules. Is this a familiar concept? So I'm nodding. We have these workshop rules that we bring with us into workshops. And the reason for that, and it might sound silly, but it's so hard to have a whole team to be thinking the same way. So this is just a tool to have the team to think in the same way. So a couple of weeks ago, my mother-in-law was having her birthday, and me and my husband were sitting planning this party, the whole party, and also a party game, which is called Secret Missions, where you have a small note under your table, and you're supposed to do this during the whole dinner. And of course, it's hard to come up with a lot of ideas, and suddenly I had this stupid idea that, well, somebody has to be responsible for topping up all the glasses, which would make sense if we were students and not a family with children involved. And my husband sees that this is not a good idea. So he starts telling me and attacking me like, this is stupid, and we couldn't do this, and then this person will drink too much. And then we spent, 15 minutes talking about how bad that idea was. And finally I told him, well, let's just write new notes. We don't need to discuss this note. And then suddenly we produced 26 notes. And then we realized we needed only 7. So all the bad ideas were just picked away. And I realized this is what I do every day at work when I start shooting down other people's ideas. Spend all the time killing a bad idea, which is going to fall out anyway. So that's why we use workshop rules, to kind of be in the same part on the same team.
But I'm not really finished with the last model. Can you just take it back? I want to discuss it more. Sure. So this is what happens when we talk. I always disrupt. So I'm really interested in, okay, so we have the learning loop. Okay, think about design as learning. How do we involve people in learning? Okay, we can use workshops and we can use involvement. But how do we actually move into co-production? And I think I want to dwell a bit on the case that you just presented. What did you call it again? It was the
oceaneering case?
Oceaneering case. Because I think that's very brave. It's extremely brave to let go of your process before it's finished. So unfinished artifacts and processes are really interesting, or very interesting to me, at least. So I have this issue with handovers. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the concept of handovers, where the designer or any other who has made some artifact, for example, a consultancy, and they hand over their thing to the client. And that thing is almost always finished, because that's what you're paid to do. And often if you're working with the invisible thing and problem solving, you make beautiful graphics. So you make a persona maybe, or you'll make some scenarios, you'll make maybe a gigamap or a customer journey, and you'll give that to the client because the client wants something. And you're really good at designing. Maybe you're a graphic designer, or you have really good training for visualization. But what you're giving that client is a one-way communicative artifact. So what you gave when you gave something that was unfinished, you gave this empowering and co-production thing where they were actually finishing the product for you, but it's a dynamic kind of handover, which I would love people to start figuring out how to do, because I have, like I said, a little bit issues with that. And also research, I'll go back to the research. So in research, and I do science and technology studies in addition to design, there are these ideas about knowledge objects. And in my thesis, it's been a while now since I wrote it, but I wrote about the knowledge objects, the unfinished knowledge objects, which is those objects that we try to complete together, and because they're unfinished, they have this energy, this thing about them, their puzzle that we want to solve. And that's why these puzzles or knowledge objects, if somebody wants to do research, it's epistemic objects. So they're unfinished. So this draws multiple people into the process because you want to finish it. As humans, we have this urge to finish things. And then if designers are making beautiful handovers based on the processes that they've been learning alone, or they might be involving, at the left here, there's some involvement, but there's not learning together. If the designer is learning through abductive reasoning, making, for example, a map or a customer journey, it's a way for the designer to learn, and they just hand it over one way. That's a very different thing than inviting people to finish or join the process. And I think that's really interesting. And it leads us to something that we've been discussing, which is the hi-fi, lo-fi.
But before
thing.
we go there,
Oh,
I see that we
more.
actually lost the part where we pick up the questions.
Oh, yeah, there's no questions.
There's no question. Okay. Then at least I checked.
Yeah, you checked.
It would be too bad for us to invite people to come with question and not follow up.
Oh, yeah.
But good. All right, but the thing about lo-fi, hi-fi, which I think it's high fidelity versus low fidelity prototypes. So I'm a trained product designer, so I started to make things with this blue styrofoam. They looked really ugly, and I don't know what I got out of it. Maybe learning.
Yeah.
And then I moved on to doing more digital. And what I think now is super fascinating is that it's sometimes I don't even paper prototypes. I don't make them anymore. I do digital prototypes. Wireframes, well, it's easier to just to work with Figma. And suddenly we also have both kind of AI and low-code, no-code. And I really believe in low-code, no-code being able to transform the way we design and use technology. Nurses, for example, that has to struggle with who is working when and how. It's a super complicated question for an algorithm when you're taking every possible thing into the equation. But for a nurse who has a team of 12, she already knows, well, this lady has to pick up her kids at this time, and she has a mother that she needs to help on Friday, all these little variations. So if they could be enabled by technology, that would be amazing. That brings us kind of up to the dilemma that we've been discussing, and that's there. I would say as a designer, you should always start with the lo-fi prototype. But does that make sense?
I'm not sure, because I always say that to my students, that they should never come with a finished product, because there's no time to critique. We cannot steer them into the right way. It's like this law. And I've been teaching my students that, and I was taught that in design school. But we started questioning it now these days, where AI can make almost finished products like quite fast. And you can make this product that, like you said, like nurses can finish it. So we're in the co-production and the empowerment section here, actually without having those unfinished, inviting objects. But then we also were discussing do we miss a lot of the learning? So if designers learn visually from making things, are we then losing a lot of the learning that's important for designers? I'm not sure.
Me neither. I don't know. And I think it's super fascinating that one thing, a piece of information that we teach and tell every design student, there is no knowledge of it. But that's probably a lot of design. It comes from practicing, and we're guessing and doing our best a lot of the time. So, yeah. If there's one thing I want you to take with you is that we're all kind of a bit uncertain about what design is and so on. Yeah.
And we sent an email to all, not all, but many of our colleagues, just asking about the lo-fi, hi-fi assumption that's going to be built into design, education, and practice. And we found some research, but not that much actually validating that it has to be lo-fi first.
No, but a lot of people were commenting that we should prototype it and not prototype it and make smaller versions and go out there and learn. And I think kind of then we're back to learning again, and that you make stuff to learn. And that's maybe something I wish I could see more as a practitioner, that we actually start building things before we know too much, because you learn so much by just doing things and figuring things out.
And I'm curious also, because this is a learning. Well, I see it, and we try to see it. We experiment with the idea of design as learning, but then who's going to pay for it? So if you want to have the continual learning, and we say that, oh, don't give the finished handovers, like you're going against the client. Maybe they want something beautiful. They want to put it on the wall in the boardroom and say, oh, we got this from eggs. Hanne made this. It was beautiful.
Yeah, and a lot of design companies live on årsrapporter and so on, but then AI is kind of pulling that away from us. So yeah, that's scary. But I tried, as always when we discuss, I tried to kind of pull things together and create a conclusion. And I didn't even remember it, so I had to write it down. So we wondered, is design to kind of, in any problem, to try and find a root cause? Or maybe a root effect? And then involve everybody else in solving this?
Maybe, but then we're kind of moving out of the studio approach again. So are we going back to where we started? Is design problem solving? Is design creating stuff? Is it creating stuff for problem solving and involving people while doing it? I don't know.
I don't know.
I think it's interesting, and I would love to hear. Oh, hey, questions are coming in. Yay!
Yay.
Okay, I'll just show the question. scientific works. I'll just read it. I'll read it to you. How much of being a designer is actually about being a facilitator and a communicator?
Oh, I love that question. And I'm definitely one of the facilitator, communicator people, designers. I really love to be involved in people, and I'm happy when I see other people succeed. But then I have, and I'm that type of designers, but then I have amazing colleagues who never look up from their computer and they're delivering amazing stuff. So I would say you have both types of designers, and right now, based on what's happening in the design community with there's a lot less of the facilitator work out there, higher competition and all these things. But on the production side, there is still a lot, way more work. So you kind of have this shift. And if you're going one way, then you suddenly start to maybe get a bit insecure. Is my skill not that attractive anymore? Do I have to do something else? So you have this, I don't know how many it's in any single design company, but there's two ways you can choose, and maybe you mix a bit of both. And I love being a project where I can have both kind of people with me. It's way easier than just having facilitators trying to do production or the other way around.
I think it's really interesting, and I think that's what we're teaching our students, mainly facilitating and communicating and trying to figure out how to communicate without it just being one way, but actually facilitating other actors to communicate with each other to kind of collectively solve problems or just learn about things and test assumptions. So I think facilitating and communicating is really important for some parts of design. So now we're monopolizing the word design into this understanding. Okay, more questions. So what are your thoughts on the way Figma makes too detailed prototypes? Are we hurting ourselves by using a very advanced tool with lots of features? We've been discussing this a little bit.
We've been discussing this a little bit. I would definitely say yes, and you also risk of kind of overcomplicating a lot of things. And I'm super fascinating by the way that I sometimes can spend hours on the computer trying to just get things perfect. And then afterwards I realized that I didn't even solve what I was supposed to do. I just got stuck on fixing this thing and I wasted 4 hours, but I still feel good. But it's totally unacceptable for me to kind of put down my computer, everything, and just look at the screen and kind of like, this is not working. Why isn't it not working? So yeah. I think a lot of times I should spend more time kind of considering my work than actually try to produce all the time, because I kind of lose that reflection that I need to improve things. And then somebody else comes along, which is really helpful, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and we see that when our students jump straight to Figma or some no-code solution, they often don't prototype the assumptions underlying the entire service or system or product. They kind of get stuck in the testing the buttons and the flow of a website or an app instead of actually questioning, why am I making a website or an app? So it's a very easy solution to go to fast and get some results. But sometimes it can take away from really understanding, was app, like making an app, was that the right thing to do now? Or was it just the easy thing to do? And it was much easier for me to work on the flow and how people navigate the app than actually work on like asking, what's the root cause here? So I think it can confuse things even though it's a really good tool. Yeah, it's my reflection, I guess. Ooh, this is interesting. What's the difference between design and the scientific method? Ooh, pass. So it depends. Is it the natural scientific method? So I think design and social science as scientific method has a lot in common. We teach our students social science, so ethnography, interviews, qualitative research. We have design anthropology. But I also think that design has a lot in common with experimentation, but we don't do random trials or random experiments, and we don't have a control group. So there are differences here, but I think if we frame design as learning, we also need to be really focused on the methods that we use. So we're really particular about that. And I know a lot of design agencies are not thinking that what they're doing is research and they don't report to the data government and the agency, for example. But I force my students to actually think about the ethics of research and what they're doing as design. It's kind of doing research. So there are differences, but I see design and science as not really being that different. When I do research, I have assumptions, I test my assumptions, I talk to people, I use structured methods, and I make some creative analysis of the work later to make some generalizations or to have some concepts that can guide me to understand what I'm seeing. And I think it's really similar to at least what we teach the students. Do you have any?
Nope, I don't.
No? Okay.
I think that's too difficult.
Oh yes, so are you familiar with using design science research methodology? So we have a quote from Herbert Simon, which is like the father of design science, and I see design science actually being really focused now in organization science since I have my degree from BI, but I haven't actually been that familiar with it because there is this difference between design science and, or it has been, and design, in the terms that design science often assume a stable context around the phenomenon that we're looking at. And the way design operates is actually a good strategy when things are really uncertain. We don't know which way it's going to go. So we're designing for something that's going to be open-ended. So from my perspective, and I've only kind of read the Herbert Simon approach, that's a difference, assuming that it's more stable context, that we can actually see more the causal connections between factors for design science. Do you use any of Dieter Rams' 10 principles for good designs in your lectures or your work?
Nope.
Nope.
I don't.
No, me either.
Don't know about it. Should probably look it up.
You don't want to present it? We still have time.
Let's take the last one.
Okay, maybe you can choose one.
I can choose one?
One that's interesting. Well, they're all interesting, so
Ooh,
please
I
stay
like this
later
one.
and talk more if you want.
I think design involves a lot of exploration with multiple possible solutions. How to decide where to explore, or when to settle on a solution.
Oh, do you want to take it?
I want to push you into taking it.
Oh, do you want to?
Yeah.
Well, I usually teach design students, and they have this area of time, this window of time where they have to do it. And I think that's the big question that I also said. If we're going to invite people into these learning loops, okay, so who's paying for learning over time? So that's one of the reasons why we have handovers and design projects. They have budgets, and then you hire a designer, and it goes into the project. And then at some point, the designer has to go if it's not an internal designer. I think that's one of the main questions. If we're going to see design as learning, how do we involve people in this learning, and how do we, as designers, go out of the situation and leave something behind that's knowledge that could actually keep on learning in a way. I'm working on some methods here that.
But back to the questions, I really love project management theory because it says that you together as a team should discuss what are we trying to solve and how can we actually solve it, and together kind of decide on a hypothesis, and then you go explore to kind of answer that question, and then you go back to your team and you kind of just take the discussion together. And I really believe that the team who's working on trying to fix something is the best people to try and fix it. So it's up to that team and they really should have the mandate to be able to say, this is what we need to be working on now. And it's really cool to see in companies like, we're in Trondheim now, but Ersdal Medical, who is one of the biggest exporters of products in Norway. They deliver healthcare products and healthcare training. They're trying to do this with having good product teams, but they keep giving feedback. It's really hard, and you really have to understand your market and be able to kind of argument that we need to do this or do that. So, but then if you're trying to understand your market, again, you need to start learning. And I think, this is kind of what we've been talking about, design as learning. But then you can critique us and say that, well, what about graphical design? What about creating cups? What about industrial design?
I still see it as learning. Learning through making. You're putting things into the world that wasn't there before, and you learn by the effects that produces. Every kind of design is some provocation or some change in the world that can produce some sort of learning. But I think maybe this is like a torch or like a brandfakkel that I'm throwing in, that maybe it's the economics of the design industry that's kind of stopping these learning loops.
And we're going to draw a line there and say thank you all for listening to us. And please, if you have more questions, stay behind and talk with us and have a really, really lovely afternoon.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.